She thought the mountain had gone quiet after loss until a wild heartbeat found her door. In a cedar cabin, a 74-year-old widow met a gaze the color of moonlight. A bobcat named Luna. Some say the wild forgets us. They're wrong. On a night of rain and rattling windows, when a stranger crossed the fence, courage came on 4 silent paws. This isn't a tale about taming nature, it's about 2 lives meeting halfway, and the promise that kindness leaves behind. Listen to the snow, the breath, the hush between thunder. Stay with us, because sometimes the guardian you're praying for doesn't wear wings at all. The wind came first, thin, high, and restless, sliding through the pines and scraping against the window panes like invisible fingers. Evelyn Ward set her teacup down on the old oak table and watched the curtains breathe inward. A storm was rolling down from the Wasatch Range, heavy with snow. At 74, she'd learned to read weather better than the radio ever could. When the mountain went quiet, it meant trouble was coming. She checked the fire, coaxing a few reluctant flames back to life. The house crackled and sighed, old timbers shifting under the weight of the cold. On the mantel above, a black and white photograph of her late husband, Daniel, smiled through the flicker of light. "You'd say I'm crazy for staying up here, wouldn't you?" she murmured. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley, and for a moment it almost sounded like laughter answering her. By 8 o'clock, the power faltered once, then died completely. Evelyn lit the oil lamp she always kept by the sink, its glow soft and golden against the wooden walls. She wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders and listened. The silence after a storm begins is never real silence, it's waiting. Snow began to hiss against the roof, steady, relentless. She reached for her journal and wrote 1 sentence. "The mountain is breathing tonight." Somewhere in that breath, a faint sound rose, scratching, hesitant, from the porch. She froze. A raccoon, maybe, or one of the stray dogs that sometimes wandered down from the logging road. The scratching came again, slower this time, followed by a low, rasping cry. Not quite a growl, not quite a plea. Evelyn took the lamp, its light trembling with her hand, and walked to the front door. Through the small glass panel, she saw movement, a shape crouched near the step, half buried in snow. 2 golden orbs caught the light and blinked. A bobcat, its fur was matted with sleet, sides heaving with shallow breaths. For an instant, wild instinct flashed in her chest. Close the door, lock it, stay still. But something deeper, older, overrode it. The animal wasn't hunting, it was hurting. She set the lamp on the floor and cracked the door just wide enough for her voice to slip through. "Easy now," she whispered, as if speaking to her younger self. The bobcat didn't move, its ears flattened, but there was no snarl, no threat, only exhaustion. Evelyn's heart beat so loud she could feel it in her palms. She took the heavy quilt from the coat rack, knelt, and eased it toward the creature across the threshold. Snowflakes drifted in, melting on her bare wrist. The bobcat flinched, tried to stand, and collapsed again with a small cry that made her throat tighten. She noticed the swelling along its flank, an old wound reopened, perhaps, and the unmistakable roundness of pregnancy beneath the ribs. "Oh, you poor thing," she said softly. "You've chosen the wrong night, haven't you?" She nudged the quilt closer until it touched fur. The animal's eyes flicked from her hand to the darkness beyond the porch. Then, with a motion both graceful and desperate, it dragged itself onto the fabric. Evelyn folded the quilt around it, careful not to trap the legs, and pulled the bundle inside just as the wind screamed and slammed the door behind her. For a long moment, woman and wildcat stared at each other in the flicker of the oil lamp. She placed the creature near the stove, letting the heat seep into the damp fur. Steam rose where the snow melted. The smell of pine smoke and wild earth filled the kitchen. Evelyn spoke little, only enough to keep her own fear at bay. "You'll be all right. Just rest." The bobcat's eyes closed halfway, unblinking yet trusting in that animal way that knows sincerity better than words. Evelyn moved about the house, quietly boiling water, tearing an old sheet into strips, gathering the small first aid kit Dr. Riley had insisted she keep after Daniel's accident. She dabbed at the wound with a warm cloth, expecting a hiss or a strike. but none came. The bobcat merely shuddered once and stilled again. "You're tougher than most folks I know," she said, managing a fragile smile. Outside, the storm deepened. The world beyond her windows vanished into white. Every gust pressed against the house like a living thing trying to get in. Yet inside, time slowed to the rhythm of breathing hers and the animals. Evelyn thought of her daughter, Laura, safe down in the city, probably worrying about her mother's stubbornness. She would never understand this peace, this quiet companionship that mountain winters gave. Hours passed. The fire dimmed to embers. Evelyn dozed in her chair, the lamp flickering low. She woke when a small sound cut through the wind, a soft purr, almost human in its steadiness. The bobcat had shifted, curling tighter, the quilt rising gently with each breath. Evelyn leaned forward, studying the creature's face. In the lamplight, it looked serene, almost domestic. Yet behind the closed lids was a history of wildness she could only imagine. She reached out a wrinkled hand, hesitated, then let her fingers brush the edge of the quilt instead of fur. "You can stay here tonight," she whispered. "Just tonight." The words sounded like a promise even she didn't fully understand. The bobcat's tail twitched once in reply. Near midnight, the fire snapped, throwing sparks like tiny meteors. Outside, the storm began to ease, leaving a muffled hush over the valley. Evelyn rose, poured herself another cup of tea, and stood at the window. The mountains were ghosts now, their outlines swallowed by snow. For the first time since Daniel's passing, she felt something other than emptiness, responsibility, perhaps, or connection. She wasn't sure which. She turned back toward the stove. The animal slept, breathing slow and even, the faintest trace of steam still rising from its fur. A sense of fragile balance filled the room, two lives that had drifted apart from the world finding, for a moment, a shared shelter. Evelyn blew out the lamp, letting darkness fold around them. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was the soft gleam of those golden eyes opening once more, watching over her from the hearth. When morning came, the world outside lay buried under 3 feet of snow. The power was still out, but sunlight filtered weakly through the frosted glass. Evelyn woke stiff and cold but smiling. The quilt by the stove was empty except for a few strands of tawny fur. The bobcat was gone. On the porch, near the edge where her footprints ended, fresh tracks curved toward the forest. She stood there in her robe, the air biting her cheeks, and followed the prints with her eyes until they vanished among the trees. A strange peace settled over her, half disappointment, half gratitude. "Goodbye, Luna," she whispered, though she had not yet chosen that name. Somewhere deep in the pines, a single cry answered, carried on the wind like a blessing. Inside, Evelyn closed the door, poured her tea, and felt the silence differently this time. Not empty, expectant. The mountain had given her something and taken nothing away. She opened her journal and wrote with steady hand. "The storm brought a guest. I think she will return." The storm had passed, leaving the mountain glazed with silence. Evelyn Ward stood on her porch, bundled in her wool coat, breath steaming in the sharp morning air. The world seemed renewed, reshaped by the snow, yet something inside her felt incomplete, as if the night had left a door open that she couldn't see. She followed the trail of paw prints until they disappeared under a pine grove, then turned back toward the cabin, clutching her shawl tighter. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and tea and faint animal musk. The folded quilt still lay by the stove, edges damp from melted snow. Evelyn touched the fabric gently, remembering the rise and fall of the creature's breathing. She told herself it was foolish to expect the wild to stay. Still, she left the door unlatched that night, without quite meaning to. The next few days unfolded quietly. She returned to her routines, feeding the birds, sweeping the porch, keeping the fire alive, but found herself glancing at the tree line more often than before. The forest had always been her comfort, yet now it felt alive with intention. Each rustle of branch or shadow across the snow made her pause, half hoping for the glint of golden eyes. 3 days later, she found them again, tracks, fresh and neat. crossing the yard toward the shed. Her pulse quickened. She set her mug down, slipped on her boots, and stepped outside. The morning was clear, blue as glass, sunlight glittering on the snow. Near the shed door, a small hollow had been scraped under the boards. The smell of earth and fur lingered there. She crouched, her breath frosting in the air. "You came back," she whispered. That afternoon, she phoned Dr. Riley Hughes, the veterinarian who'd helped her husband once rescue an injured hawk years ago. His voice, rough and kind, crackled through the line. "A bobcat, you say? Pregnant, by the look of her? Evelyn, that's quite a guest you've got." He advised caution, no feeding, no touching, just distance and observation. "If she trusts you enough to stay close, that's miracle enough," he said. Evelyn smiled as she hung up. She knew better than to interfere, but the idea of sharing her space with something wild again filled her with purpose. That night, while refilling the wood box, she saw movement by the shed Luna, unmistakable even in the dim light. The bobcat's eyes caught the lantern glow, then drifted down to the snow, calm and unafraid. Evelyn whispered softly, "Welcome back, girl." The animal flicked her ears but did not leave. Days melted into weeks. Evelyn began setting her old Nikon camera on the kitchen counter, ready for each morning's ritual. From her window, she watched Luna stretch in the snow, her spotted fur shimmering under the weak sun. Sometimes the bobcat hunted mice near the fence, moving with a grace Evelyn envied. Other times, she simply lay beneath the deck, the curve of her belly growing more defined. When Evelyn finally captured her first clear photograph, she felt a rush of pride unlike anything in years. The image, Luna in profile, breath misting against the cold, looked almost sacred. She printed it on her old machine, framing it beside Daniel's photo on the mantel. "You'd have liked her," she told him. "She's got your stubbornness." On the fourth week, she spotted Luna in the garden at dusk, pawing through the soft earth where the snow had begun to melt. Evelyn watched quietly as the animal gathered dried twigs and grass between her teeth, carrying them back under the shed. It hit her then the bobcat was nesting. She leaned on the window ledge, her heart tightening with something that felt like hope. New life in her yard, after so much loss. A few days later, a fresh storm rolled through. Evelyn stayed inside, knitting by the fire, but couldn't shake her worry. She imagined Luna huddled with her unborn kittens, wind shrieking around the shed. Each time the house groaned, Evelyn added another log to the fire, as if her warmth might somehow reach through the walls and comfort the creature outside. On the third night, the storm eased. When dawn came, the sky was pale and still. Evelyn stepped outside, the snow crisp beneath her boots. She crouched by the shed, listening. A faint sound drifted out, soft, rhythmic, like the sigh of tiny lungs. She pressed a hand to her chest. "You did it, girl," she whispered. The knowledge filled her with quiet joy. Life had found its way through the cold. She began keeping a journal of observations. February 12th, Luna nesting, visible only by movement. Sounds indicate birth of at least 2 kittens. Each entry felt like a prayer. She noted hunting patterns, footprints, changes in weather. Dr. Riley called once a week to check in. His tone half amusement, half admiration. "You're turning into my best field assistant," he said. She laughed, realizing she hadn't laughed that freely in months. One morning, while pouring coffee, she caught sight of Luna through the window again. The bobcat stood in the sunlight, stretching, her coat glossy and full. Evelyn raised her camera slowly, snapped 3 shots, then lowered it, unwilling to intrude too long. The animal turned her head, golden eyes meeting human ones through glass. It wasn't affection exactly, but recognition. They understood each other's solitude. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridges, Evelyn sat by the stove flipping through the photographs she'd printed that day. In each one, Luna looked both fierce and tender. She thought of the kittens unseen beneath the shed and smiled. "You keep them safe," she said softly. "I'll do the same for you." It felt absurd, speaking to a wild thing, but the cabin had never felt less lonely. In March, Laura called from Salt Lake City, her voice bubbling through static. "Mom, I'm pregnant." The words made Evelyn laugh and cry all at once. Her daughter's excitement spilled through the phone line, and Evelyn promised to visit after the thaw. But when Laura asked if she was lonely, Evelyn paused. "Not as much anymore," she said truthfully. The following days brought sunlight and slow melting snow. Birds returned to the feeders, their chirps filling the air with energy. Evelyn spent mornings watching the yard, afternoons journaling, evenings knitting baby socks for both her future grandchild and, somehow, for the Bobcat kittens she would never touch. It was a kind of symmetry she didn't question. One twilight, as she stood at the window, she noticed Luna emerging from under the shed. Behind her, two tiny shapes stumbled into the open kittens, no bigger than her hand, their fur soft and spotted. Evelyn's throat tightened. She lifted the camera with trembling fingers, capturing the moment through tears. Life had indeed returned to her doorstep. That night, as stars blinked through the clear sky, Evelyn sat by the window long after midnight. The fire had burned low, and the cabin was quiet except for the faint chirps of night insects. Somewhere outside, a mother bobcat guarded her young, and a widow finally stopped feeling alone. The wild and the human had found a fragile peace, bound by winter and survival. When she finally went to bed, she left the curtain open. The moon hung over the snowy yard like a silver coin, and in its light, she thought she saw a figure move near the shed. Maybe it was Luna, maybe just shadow, but Evelyn smiled anyway. "Good night, my friend," she whispered. And in the hush that followed, the mountains seemed to answer. By early March, the mountain thaw had begun. Snow shrank back from the porch steps, and water trickled down the hill in narrow silver lines. Beneath the old ash tree, near the shed, Luna, the golden-brown bobcat with her dark rosettes and tufted ears, worked tirelessly, reshaping the hollow where her kittens had been born. Evelyn Ward, 74, stood at her kitchen window in her moss-green sweater and beige shawl, watching through her Nikon's lens. Luna's muscles moved beneath her spotted coat like liquid bronze. She carried tufts of dry grass in her mouth, placing them in careful circles before curling around her two newborns to nurse. From that distance, the scene looked both wild and tender, like something sacred she wasn't meant to witness. The kittens, tiny copies of their mother, one dark as bark, the other pale like dried wheat pressed against her belly. Evelyn could almost feel their heartbeat in her own chest. When the wind rose, Luna lifted her head, ears twitching. She scanned the yard, amber eyes alert, then fixed on the cabin window. Evelyn froze. For a breathless second, woman and bobcat locked eyes through glass and distance. There was no fear, only recognition, the quiet accord of two mothers who understood loss. Evelyn lowered the camera, whispering, "You're safe here." The words never reached the wildcat, yet Luna relaxed, lowering her chin to the kittens again. The tension drained from Evelyn's shoulders. She felt part of the silence instead of intruding on it. That night, a faint cry woke her. She lit her lamp and peeked outside. Luna was dragging a rabbit across the snow, its fur streaked with moonlight. She vanished beneath the ash tree. The rhythm of the wild continued, ancient and unbroken, just beyond Evelyn's door. Days passed in a pattern as delicate as breathing. Morning sun found Luna stretching, licking frost from her paws, while the kittens tumbled clumsily in the nest. Evelyn noted everything in her journal times: temperatures, behaviors, a scientist disguised as a grandmother. Sometimes Luna vanished for hours, returning with small prey, fur dusted with frost. Once Evelyn saw her chase off a crow that had ventured too close. The bobcat's power startled her. For a heartbeat she remembered that this was no pet, no tame soul. Nature's grace came wrapped in claws. On a warm afternoon, Evelyn stepped quietly onto her porch, keeping the wind at her back. Luna was sunning near the ash tree, eyes half closed, kittens climbing over her spotted flank. Evelyn's breath caught at the beauty of it, golden fur against melting snow, life against the remnants of winter. She lifted her Nikon, zoomed in, and captured the frame. Luna yawning, one paw extended, the kittens mid-pounce. When the shutter clicked, Luna's ears flicked. But she didn't flee. Instead, she looked straight at the lens, calm and certain, as though posing for the woman who had given her shelter months before. That evening, Evelyn printed the photograph and pinned it beside Daniel's picture. Two worlds. Side by side, the man she had loved and the creature who had brought life back to her doorstep. She whispered, "Look at her, Daniel. She's fearless, well-intended, well into the rand." The next morning, a hawk circled overhead. Evelyn watched from the window as Luna hissed, crouched low, and shielded her kittens beneath her body. The hawk wheeled away. "Strength in silence," Evelyn wrote the phrase down, her hand trembling slightly. Spring advanced. Tiny green shoots pierced the thawed soil around the ash tree. The kittens, now steadier, followed Luna through the yard, learning to stalk and leap. Evelyn could hear their faint chirps of excitement carried on the breeze. Every sound was a song of survival. One evening, Dr. Riley stopped by with a parcel of fresh feed for the birds. He joined her at the window, watching Luna lead her young. "They're growing fast," he murmured. Evelyn nodded. "So am I," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Later, as twilight deepened, Luna climbed onto a fallen log, the two kittens scrambling after her. The setting sun caught her fur, turning it to fire. Evelyn lifted her camera once more, but then lowered it, afraid to break the spell. Some moments, she realized, were meant only to be remembered. Rain came overnight, soft and steady. By dawn, the air smelled of wet earth and pine. Luna emerged from the shelter, shaking droplets from her coat. The kittens bounded clumsily beside her, one sliding on the slick grass. Evelyn laughed aloud, the sound echoing off the trees like music. That laugh drew Luna's gaze. For an instant, the wildcat paused, eyes gleaming through the rain. Then she blinked slowly, a gesture almost like trust, before leading her offspring back under the ash tree. Evelyn pressed her hand against the window pane, feeling warmth where there should have been cold. When darkness fell, she sat by the stove with her tea. Outside, the ash tree swayed gently, its branches sheltering three small lives. Evelyn whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years, not for herself, but for them. "May you all survive the night." The mountain answered with silence, and in that silence the boundary between woman and wilderness blurred completely. The nights grew warmer as April approached, and the air carried the scent of thawed earth and pine. Beneath the old ash tree, Luna, the golden-brown bobcat with dark rosettes across her coat, black-tipped ears, and eyes the color of molten amber, moved restlessly. The kittens were nearly 6 weeks old now, and her world had widened from the small circle of the den to the entire yard. They wrestled in the grass while she kept a sharp eye on every shadow. Evelyn Ward, 74 years old, silver hair tied neatly in a bun, light rosy skin marked with soft wrinkles, often watched from her window in her moss-green sweater and beige shawl. Each morning she recorded notes about Luna's patterns. The mother bobcat had grown leaner and stronger, her body sculpted by the hunt, her steps deliberate as a whisper. Evelyn marveled at the rhythm between vigilance and tenderness that defined her days. When the sun fell, Luna's pupils widened to black moons. She slipped from the den, silent as smoke, weaving between pines to track the scent of a rabbit. Her muscles flowed beneath her spotted fur, tail twitching once before the final leap. The forest answered with stillness, and then the soft crackle of snow under paw. By the time she returned, the kittens were already waiting, chirping softly at her scent. But the mountain was not without predators. A gray coyote had begun circling the territory, drawn by the smell of new life. Luna sensed it long before Evelyn ever noticed an unease in the air, the shift of silence between the trees. She started pacing at dusk, ears flicking toward the ridge, her growl low and constant. The kittens, unaware of danger, chased one another through puddles, while their mother's fur bristled. That night, Evelyn fell asleep by the fire, the radio murmuring low. Outside, clouds thickened across the moon. Luna crouched near her den, golden eyes fixed on the darkness. A shadow slipped between the birches, a larger shape, cautious, hungry. The coyote's outline appeared, ribs showing, muzzle lowered. Luna rose to meet it, every hair alive with tension. The first sound came like thunder, an explosion of snarls and snow. Evelyn woke instantly, heart racing. She grabbed her oil lamp and hurried to the window. Beyond the glass, two forms tangled in the half-light. Luna, small but fierce, her claws striking like lightning, and the coyote, snapping jaws flashing white. The kittens huddled under the ash tree, crying in high, thin notes that tore at the night. Evelyn ran to the back door. "No!" she shouted into the storm of sound. The lamp's glow threw wild shadows across the yard. Luna pivoted, landing on the coyote's back, sinking claws deep. The predator twisted, snapping at her flank. Blood streaked the snow. For an instant, Evelyn saw the bobcat's eyes catch the light, pure fire, not fear. The coyote retreated with a limp, vanishing into the tree line, but Luna staggered. Her breathing came shallow and fast, a dark stain spreading across her shoulder. Evelyn's knees weakened. She knew that kind of wound. She had seen it before in stray animals brought to the nature center years ago. "Hold on, girl," she whispered, fumbling for her coat and gloves. Outside, the air was sharp with iron. Luna lay half hidden beneath the ash tree, her kittens pressed close, mewing softly. Evelyn approached slowly, her beige coat brushing snow. "Easy now," she said in the same low voice she had used months ago. Luna lifted her head, amber eyes narrowing, torn between instinct and trust. The old woman knelt, pressing a folded towel against the bleeding shoulder. For a moment the wildcat tensed, a guttural growl rising from her chest, but she didn't strike. Evelyn's gloved hands trembled as she kept pressure on the wound. "You're all right. I've got you," she murmured. The steam from their breath mingled in the cold air. After long minutes, the bleeding slowed. Luna's body sagged in exhaustion, eyes fluttering half shut. Evelyn fetched warm water and a strip of linen, cleaning the wound as best she could. "Doctor, Riley," she whispered to herself, thinking of calling him. But she couldn't leave the kittens unguarded. Instead, she tore another cloth and wrapped it gently around Luna's shoulder. "That'll have to do till morning." She stayed there until the first trace of light brushed the mountains. When dawn arrived, frost shimmered like glass. Luna stirred, testing her leg. The kittens climbed over her, purring their small, throaty sounds. Evelyn watched from a distance now, hands clasped tight to her chest. The bobcat rose unsteadily and limped toward the shed, pausing to look back once. The gaze carried no fear, only an acknowledgement between survivors. Over the next week, Evelyn saw her strength return. The wound scabbed dark against golden fur, the gait smoothing with each day. Yet something in Luna had changed. She lingered closer to the cabin, hunting within sight of Evelyn's porch, her territory shrinking to safety's edge. Every so often, their eyes met through the morning light, two guardians of the same small patch of world. Rain came hard one afternoon, drumming on the tin roof. Luna huddled beneath the porch with her kittens. Evelyn left a dry towel near the steps but didn't step closer. The wildcat's amber eyes glowed in the gloom, steady and watchful. Between them was an invisible thread, thin, fragile, yet unbreakable. Later that night, Evelyn wrote in her journal, April 8th, "Luna fought a coyote and won. She will heal. She is fierce." She paused, adding softly aloud, "And she's not alone." The cabin's lamp flickered, and through the window she saw Luna's shadow slip back under the ash tree. The kittens followed in a single line, tails bobbing. In the hush that followed, the mountain exhaled again, as if relieved. Evelyn poured herself a cup of tea and watched the fire dance. Outside, Luna's low purr rolled across the yard, a sound of warning and of comfort. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt she was part of something larger than herself, something ancient and wild that did not end with fear, but with endurance. The ash tree swayed gently, scattering the last of its frost. Beneath it, a wounded bobcat lay curled around her young, breathing slow and steady. Inside the cabin, a widow whispered a prayer of thanks. Between them, silence held the shape of trust. By the time the snow had finally retreated from the hollows, the air smelled of wet pine and new grass. The mountain had shed its white silence for birdsong and wind again. Evelyn Ward, 74 years old, her silver hair pinned neatly behind her head, opened the window one bright morning and felt the first true warmth of spring brush her lined face. The months of fear and cold had passed. The world outside her cabin was alive once more. Beneath the ash tree, the golden-brown bobcat named Luna stretched luxuriously, her shoulder now a faint scar beneath her spotted fur. Her amber eyes blinked slowly in the sunlight. The two kittens were growing fast, their coats darker and their movements steadier. They chased each other through tufts of new grass, pouncing on shadows, tumbling in clumsy delight. Evelyn laughed quietly to herself as she watched them through her Nikon's lens. Each morning had become ritual. She would brew her tea, wrap her beige shawl over her moss-green sweater, and take her camera to the window. The world on the other side of that glass had become her sanctuary. Luna sunning on a rock, the kittens stalking invisible prey. It was a theater of survival and grace. Sometimes Evelyn whispered encouragement, as though her words could be carried on the breeze. Dr. Riley Hughes stopped by one afternoon, the first visitor she had in weeks. His pickup rumbled up the dirt road, scattering a pair of jays from the fence. He stepped out, tall and sturdy. His red flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, a paper bag of birdseed tucked under one arm. "You've been busy," he said with a grin when he saw her photographs pinned along the cabin wall. "I think you're turning into one of us naturalists." Evelyn smiled. "They're my neighbors," she said, gesturing toward the ash tree. Riley followed her gaze and caught sight of Luna lounging in the grass. "You're lucky," he murmured. "Few people ever get to see this side of the wild, let alone earn its trust." His voice softened. "You know, this is rare, Evelyn. She's not just tolerating you. She's chosen your ground." That thought stayed with her long after he left. She wrote it in her journal. "She's chosen my ground." The words filled her with quiet pride, but also a kind of humility. Life had not forgotten her after all. It had simply returned in a different shape, wearing fur and silence instead of words. As April ripened into May, the yard bloomed with wildflowers. Dandelions burst yellow through the grass, and a soft hum of bees joined the mountain air. Evelyn spent her mornings photographing Luna's family, her Nikon clicking gently while sunlight caught the fine hairs of the bobcat's ears. Her favorite shot came one evening when Luna carried a field mouse in her jaws, her kittens following in single file like tiny soldiers. At twilight, Evelyn sat by the open window, editing her prints. The golden light spilled across the photos, each image telling its own small story. Luna mid-leap, the kittens wrestling near the porch, the mother's scar glowing faintly in the sun. She pinned that photo above the mantel beside Daniel's portrait. "You'd be proud," she whispered. "You always said life finds a way." Thanks, Student. A few days later, Evelyn noticed Luna behaving differently. The mother bobcat began venturing closer to the cabin, sometimes resting beneath the porch steps while her kittens played nearby. Once, Evelyn opened the back door and found Luna sitting in the yard, head tilted toward her like a cat who understood patience. Evelyn froze. They watched each other for a long moment, one creature scarred by grief, the other by battle, united by the strange familiarity of solitude. That night, Evelyn dreamed of Daniel again. He was standing on the porch, smiling, the mountains behind him awash in gold. "You were never alone," he said. And then the dream faded with the morning light. When she woke, Luna was gone from the yard, and the mountain was covered in mist. The mist lingered for 3 days. Evelyn worried, though she told herself not to. Then, one morning, a small movement at the fence caught her eye. Luna had returned, the kittens in tow, dragging a rabbit almost her size. Her shoulder scar gleamed silver in the dew. Evelyn exhaled a shaky laugh. "You always come back," she murmured, lifting her camera once more. As the weeks went by, she found herself planning her days around Luna's routine: morning hunts, afternoon naps, twilight games. The photographs piled up. She began labeling them by behavior: stalking, grooming, teaching. It was a quiet joy, one that gave purpose to each dawn. Her daughter, Laura, called one evening to check in. "You sound happy, Mom," she said through the crackle of the line. Evelyn smiled into the receiver. "I am. There's a wild family living under my ash tree. You'd like them." Laura laughed softly. "As long as they don't come inside." "They wouldn't," Evelyn said. "They know their boundaries. We both do." Near the end of May, Evelyn noticed the kittens growing bolder. They climbed the ash tree's lower branches, testing their balance, tiny claws gripping bark. Luna watched from below, eyes bright, tail flicking with pride. Evelyn took picture after picture, unable to stop. The sight filled her heart with an ache that was both joy and the awareness of how fleeting moments like this were. One evening, just before sunset, Luna appeared on Evelyn's porch. The mother bobcat stood in full light, her fur a mosaic of gold and umber. The kittens hid behind the steps. Luna looked at Evelyn through the screen door, steady, calm, unafraid. Then she turned, her tail curling once, and vanished into the woods. Evelyn whispered to the empty air, "Be safe, my friend." That night, Evelyn printed her favorite photo, yet the one where Luna stands at the threshold of light and shadow, looking back toward the cabin. She framed it and placed it beside her bed. As the wind rustled through the trees outside, she fell asleep to the faint echo of wild purrs and the promise of another dawn. The mountain exhaled again, softer now, filled with the hum of new life. Under the ash tree, the kittens dreamed beside their mother. Inside the cabin, Evelyn dreamed too of trust, of rebirth, of the strange, wordless love between a woman and a wild heart that had chosen to stay. The peace that spring had brought didn't last long. By June, the air above the Utah foothills shimmered with heat, and the snow-fed streams ran fast and thin. Evelyn Ward sat at her kitchen table one morning, the radio humming faintly behind her. She wasn't really listening, just letting the familiar voices fill the quiet. It wasn't until the word break-in reached her that she turned up the volume. Authorities are warning elderly residents in rural areas to remain alert. The suspect has struck 3 homes in Summit and Wasatch counties. Police believe he targets houses that appear isolated. Evelyn frowned. Her cabin fit that description perfectly. She clicked the radio off and stared out at the ash tree where Luna's kittens tumbled in the grass. She told herself not to worry. She'd lived alone for nearly a decade, and fear was something she had learned to tame. Still, that night she checked the door locks twice and placed her old walking stick beside the bed. Outside, the world breathed with the rhythm of crickets and running water. Luna and her young had moved their den closer to the cabin now, using the porch's shadow for shade in the day. The next morning, Evelyn found a new set of prints in the mud, not Luna's, nor her own. Heavy boots had crushed the damp earth near the back gate. Her heart sank. She crouched to examine them, her silver hair falling loose around her face. The tracks were recent. Whoever it was had walked right past the porch, only a few yards from the bobcat's den. She took a deep breath and went inside, shutting the door gently. She dialed Dr. Riley. "There's been someone around here," she said. "Could just be a hiker, but it doesn't feel right." Riley's voice came calm and steady. "Lock up, Evelyn. I'll drive by this weekend and check your place." He hesitated before adding, "Maybe you should install one of those motion cameras I told you about." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You sound like my daughter." "That's because she's right," he said. "I'll bring one up, just for my peace of mind." That evening, clouds gathered, rolling in from the west like a gray tide. Evelyn sat by her window, the Nikon on her lap, watching as Luna prowled the edge of the yard. The bobcat's movements were different tonight, tighter, more cautious. Every few minutes she paused, her tufted ears turning toward the tree line. The kittens stayed close, their play subdued. By dusk, thunder rumbled across the ridge. Evelyn lit her lamp and moved to the back door to close it. Her gaze swept the yard once more. The air seemed to hold its breath. She could see the faint outline of Luna under the ash tree, her golden coat gleaming in the half-light. Then, just beyond, a shape moved, a flicker of black against the pale grass. At first she thought it was a trick of the storm. Then lightning split the sky, revealing a man standing near the fence line, still and deliberate. He was dressed head to toe in dark clothing, a hood pulled low. Evelyn froze. Her mind raced. She turned off the lamp instantly, plunging the cabin into shadow. When she looked again, he was gone. The next morning she tried to convince herself she'd imagined it. But when Riley arrived 2 days later, he found something wedged under the porch, a torn scrap of fabric. Black, rough, and smelling faintly of oil. Could be nothing, he said quietly. But let's be cautious. He set up a small camera near the shed and showed her the receiver. If it catches anything, this light will blink. That night Evelyn barely slept. The wind pushed against the cabin walls, and every creak made her flinch. Around midnight, a sound reached her, a low growl from outside, followed by a quick scuffle of claws on wood. She sat up, heart pounding. The growl came again, sharper this time. Luna. Evelyn grabbed her lamp and crept to the window. The scene outside was chaos. Luna, her fur fluffed and eyes blazing, stood on the porch railing, tail lashing. Her kittens hid beneath the steps, eyes glowing faintly. Something moved in the shadows beyond the woodpile. Evelyn caught a glimpse of a man, crouched low, flashlight in hand. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice shaking. The light turned toward her window. For a heartbeat, their eyes met hers, terrified, his cold and unreadable. Then he bolted. Evelyn stood frozen for several seconds before reaching for the phone. Riley answered on the second ring, groggy but alert. "Stay inside," he said firmly. "I'll call the sheriff right now." When dawn came, 2 deputies searched the area but found only footprints, fresh, clear, leading back toward the forest road. The camera Riley had set captured only a brief blur of motion. A man's gloved hand, a knife glinting briefly in the flash before the frame went dark. For the rest of the week, Luna remained close to the cabin. She followed Evelyn's movements at a distance, silent as shadow. Once, when Evelyn stepped outside to hang laundry, she noticed the Bobcat perched on a fence post, watching her with narrowed eyes, scanning the tree line as if guarding her. It was both comforting and unnerving. The sheriff advised her to stay elsewhere until they caught the intruder, but Evelyn refused. "I won't abandon my home," she told him, "or them." She gestured toward the ash tree, where 2 small shapes darted through the sunlight. The deputy nodded slowly, respecting something in her voice he couldn't quite name. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire, her Nikon beside her, the security monitor blinking silently on the table. Outside, lightning flickered again, distant but growing closer. She looked toward the window, where Luna's reflection seemed to merge with her own. In the glass, 2 creatures alert to danger, each keeping watch for the other. When the storm broke, thunder roared down the valley. Evelyn tightened her shawl, whispering, "We'll be fine, girl. We've survived worse." Beyond the glass, Luna lifted her head, ears twitching, as if she had heard and understood. And somewhere out in the darkness, unseen, the man in black waited. His return, as certain as the next storm, returned in late June, bringing with it a heaviness that pressed on the mountains like a warning. For days, thunder grumbled in the distance, but it wasn't until one Friday night that it broke open over the valley. Evelyn Ward sat alone at her kitchen table, the radio crackling softly beside her, rain sliding down the window in slow silver threads. She had just finished writing in her journal when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The cabin fell silent. Only the wind and rain filled the darkness. Evelyn reached for the old brass oil lamp she kept on the counter, striking a match with steady hands. The flame caught, throwing a warm circle of light across the wooden walls. Shadows came alive in the corners, long and moving. She set the lamp near the window and listened. Somewhere outside, a branch snapped. Her first thought was Luna. The bobcat had been keeping close these last few nights, ever since the intruder's tracks had been found near the fence again. Evelyn walked to the window and peered out. The rain came down hard now, masking the yard in a silver haze. The ash tree swayed in the wind, its leaves flashing in the lightning. But there by the porch she caught a flicker of movement. Luna stood in the downpour, golden-brown fur slick against her body, amber eyes burning through the storm. Behind her, the two kittens huddled under the steps. Evelyn's heart lifted with relief. "You're here," she whispered, pressing her palm to the glass. The bobcat's ears twitched toward the cabin as if in reply, but something about Luna's posture was wrong. She was tense, tail low, body angled toward the tree line. Lightning flared again, and this time, in its flash, Evelyn saw it, a figure at the edge of the woods, tall, black-clad, unmoving. The man in black had come back. Her breath caught. She stepped backward, hand trembling on the lamp. For a moment, she thought about calling Dr. Riley or the sheriff. But the power was out, no phone, no signal. She turned off the lamp and the room fell into near total darkness, broken only by the faint blue shimmer of lightning through the windows. The air smelled of rain and fear. Outside, Luna growled a low, rolling sound that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. Evelyn's chest tightened. "Please, no," she murmured. She crept to the front door, moving as quietly as she could, every old bone in her body protesting. She could hear the man now, boots sinking into mud, the soft jingle of metal tools. He was trying the latch on the back gate. Evelyn gripped her walking stick, her pulse hammering in her ears. She didn't know what terrified her more, the intruder or the thought of Luna confronting him again. Then came a loud crack, the sound of the gate swinging open, and a new noise, the metallic slide of a knife being drawn. Lightning flashed, and for a split second the yard was as bright as day. The man's face was hidden beneath a black balaclava, eyes narrow, gleaming. He stepped forward. Luna moved first. With a snarl that tore through the rain, the bobcat lunged from the porch, her claws raking across his sleeve. He shouted in shock, stumbling backward. "Go!" Evelyn shouted through the window. "Get away!" But Luna didn't retreat. She landed between the man and the porch, fur standing like fire. The kittens bolted under the deck. The intruder swung his arm, trying to drive her off, but she darted aside, hissing, her tail lashed. Evelyn could see the knife glint in his hand. Fear and fury mixed inside her. Without thinking, she threw open the door. The rain hit her like a wall of ice. "Leave her alone!" she cried. The man turned, startled by her voice. His eyes met hers, cold and hateful. Before he could move, Luna sprang again, catching his forearm with a savage swipe. The knife flew into the mud. Evelyn backed up toward the door, shouting, "Luna, enough!" The bobcat landed in front of her, teeth bared, blocking the man's path to the cabin. The intruder stumbled, clutching his arm. Then, as if realizing he'd lost his advantage, he ran, slipping and cursing toward the forest. Lightning lit his retreat, the rain erasing his tracks almost instantly. For a long moment, Evelyn and Luna stood in the storm, both breathing hard. The old woman's hair clung to her face, the lamplight flickering behind her. Luna's amber eyes glowed like embers, her sides rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then, slowly, the bobcat turned and looked at her. It wasn't the look of a wild creature, it was something deeper, older, as if the mountain itself was gazing through those eyes. Evelyn knelt, despite the cold, and reached out a trembling hand. "You saved me," she whispered. Luna stayed still, water dripping from her whiskers. For one fragile second, Evelyn's hand hovered inches from the bobcat's fur, and then Luna stepped back, melting into the rain. She moved toward the ash tree where her kittens waited, her golden shape fading into the storm. Evelyn stood in the doorway, shaking, soaked to the skin. The knife lay half buried in the mud where the man had dropped it. She stared at it until her legs gave way and she sat heavily on the steps. Thunder rolled above her, but the fear had burned itself out. What she felt now was something else: astonishment, gratitude, and the quiet realization that the wild had once again protected her. When the sheriff arrived the next morning, the yard was washed clean except for a few paw prints leading back toward the forest. Evelyn told them only part of the truth. "He ran off before I could see his face," she said. She didn't mention the bobcat, or how the storm itself had seemed to take her side. After they left, she found Luna again at the edge of the woods. The mother bobcat watched her from the tall grass, shoulder scar glinting silver in the sun. Their eyes met across the distance. Evelyn smiled, whispering, "You kept your promise." Luna blinked once, slow and deliberate, then turned and vanished into the green. That night, the lights finally came back on, but Evelyn left her lamp burning anyway. The cabin no longer felt empty. Somewhere outside, in the dark whisper of leaves and water, she knew the wild heart that had once saved her was still near, silent, fierce, and watching. The morning after the storm smelled of smoke and damp earth. The world seemed quieter than it should have been, as though the night had taken something from it. Evelyn Ward stepped out onto her porch, the air still heavy with rain. Mud clung to her boots as she crouched beside the mark where the intruder's knife had fallen. The blade was gone, washed away or taken, but the memory of that moment lingered sharp and cold. She didn't see Luna anywhere. The ash tree, wet and glistening in the morning light, stood like a sentinel over an empty yard. Evelyn gripped her shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes scanning the tree line. "You're all right," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure who she meant, Luna or her own shaking heart. The sheriff's truck arrived an hour later, tires crunching through gravel. 2 deputies stepped out, young and brisk, their radios crackling. They took Evelyn's statement, nodding and scribbling notes. But their faces held that look of disbelief, the same she'd seen years ago when she'd told doctors her husband's final words had come to her in a dream. "So you're saying," one deputy repeated carefully, "a wild bobcat intervened during the attack?" Evelyn paused. "No," she said softly. "I'm saying I'm alive because of her." The man exchanged a glance with his partner but didn't press further. They collected what little evidence the storm had spared: a few boot prints, the broken latch on the back gate, and promised to patrol the area. When they left, the silence felt almost too large. Evelyn returned to her porch, set down her teacup, and waited. She waited through the morning, through the hum of bees and the dripping of rain from the eaves. Around noon, movement caught her eye near the ridge, a golden shimmer among the shadows. Luna, the bobcat, stepped into the clearing, limping slightly but proud. Her amber eyes met Evelyn's across the distance. Behind her, the 2 kittens bounded into view, chasing each other through the grass as if the night's violence had never happened. Evelyn pressed a hand to her heart. "You came back," she breathed. Over the next days, news of the attempted break-in spread through the small town below. Neighbors called to check in, and Dr. Riley drove up to see her in person. He found her outside mending the back gate, a hammer in one hand and a notebook tucked under her arm. "You look better than I expected," he said with a half smile. "How bad was it?" Evelyn hesitated, then looked toward the ash tree. "He had a knife," she said. "I thought that was it for me." But she came out of nowhere. Riley followed her gaze to where Luna sat, perfectly still, half hidden in tall grass. "That cat again," he said softly. "You know, Evelyn, I've worked with wildlife 30 years, and I've never heard of anything like this." "She wasn't protecting me," Evelyn said. "She was protecting her home. But it saved me just the same." Riley walked closer to the tree line, stopping a respectful distance away. "You realize," he said, "if she'd wanted to hurt you that night, she could have. Most people wouldn't survive standing between a bobcat and a threat." "I know," Evelyn said. Her eyes softened, but she saw something different. "Hevenations fong in the crade." Later that afternoon, Evelyn returned inside and developed the photos from the week before the last pictures she'd taken before the storm. There was Luna crouched under the porch, her kittens tucked safely behind her, and one frame of the forest just before lightning struck. In that photo, barely visible through the rain, was a faint human silhouette, proof, perhaps, that her fear had been real after all. She placed the printed photographs beside her journal and turned to the window. Outside, Luna and her kittens were exploring again. The little ones now old enough to wander a few yards on their own. The mother watched them carefully, her injured shoulder stiff but healing. I am, she said. Better than all right, I think. He followed her gaze toward the ash tree. Luna was there again, sitting upright in the grass, rain beating on her fur. Her kittens slept curled beside her. I think she knows you're safe now, Riley murmured. Evelyn nodded. And I think she knows she is too. The following morning, a wildlife ranger named Mia Turner came to inspect the area. She was young, sharp-eyed, wearing a green uniform and a badge that caught the sunlight. I read the report, she said to Evelyn. Most people don't get second chances with wild animals. Evelyn smiled gently. Maybe kindness has its own memory. Haid. The ranger crouched near the ash tree, studying faint paw prints in the soft dirt. If she's moved, her family, it's for safety. But she'll come back now and then. They always do. When the ranger left, Evelyn sat on her porch steps, the morning wind brushing against her face. In the distance, she could hear birds, the soft creak of branches, and something else Luna's familiar, low purr rumbling faintly from the woods. That sound followed her all day, through every quiet chore and every thought. By evening, as the last light faded, Evelyn stood at her window once more. The forest was calm, the air still, and for the first time since that terrible night, she no longer felt afraid. Thank you, she whispered toward the darkness, for reminding me what's worth keeping. And somewhere beyond the ash tree, a pair of amber eyes blinked once in reply before vanishing into the twilight. Evelyn could almost feel the rhythm of Luna's heartbeat through the glass, the steady persistence of survival. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire with her tea, thinking of the way Luna had moved through rain and lightning, fearless. She thought of Daniel, too, of how he'd always said courage wasn't loud, it was steady. She smiled faintly. You'd like her, she whispered. Sometime after midnight, headlights swept across the window. Evelyn tensed, then relaxed as she recognized Riley's truck pulling into the drive. He stepped out, hat pulled low against drizzle. Couldn't sleep, he admitted when she opened the door. Wanted to make sure you're all right. The summer deepened, and the mountain took on its gentler colors, soft gold, long green shadows, and the low hum of crickets that never seemed to stop. The days passed slowly for Evelyn Ward, 74, her life settling into a rhythm of quiet mornings and long, reflective evenings. It had been 3 weeks since the attack, but she still left the back porch light on each night. Not because she was afraid anymore, she wasn't, but because a part of her hoped that somewhere in the forest, Luna could see it. She spent most mornings tending the small garden Daniel had planted years ago. Tomatoes, lavender, and a few brave sunflowers grew in uneven rows. Her silver hair glowed softly in the early light as she worked, her green sweater sleeves rolled up, her movements slow but sure. Now and then she would pause, gaze toward the ash tree, and smile when she saw faint prints in the dirt. Luna's, she believed. The town below had started whispering her name again. Local reporters came asking for an interview, curious about the miracle widow and her guardian Bobcat. Evelyn declined each time. It's not my story, she told them gently. It's hers. Still, the sheriff sent updates. They'd caught the intruder 2 towns over, caught by the camera Riley had installed. The man had tried to break into another home. His arm was wrapped in bandages. He refused to explain the deep claw marks beneath. That evening, Riley stopped by for coffee. He brought new batteries for the motion sensor and an old newspaper clipping about Luna's species. Lynx rufus occidentalis, the western bobcat. They're rare up here, he said, sipping from his cup. She's made a home where most gave up trying. Evelyn smiled. So have I. After he left, she wandered onto the porch as the sun sank behind the pines. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Somewhere near the ridge, an owl called. The valley was wrapped in a stillness so complete she could almost hear her own heartbeat. Then, faintly, from the woods movement, at first it was just the whisper of leaves. Then came a flash of gold between the trunks. Evelyn leaned forward, breath catching. Two glowing shapes appeared at the tree line, Luna and her grown kittens, their coats sleek and shining in the twilight. They stood side by side, watching the cabin from the shadows. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "You came back," she whispered. She didn't move, didn't dare. The three bobcats stood there for several minutes, their amber eyes catching the last light like lanterns. Luna's gaze was steady, calm, almost regal. The kittens shifted restlessly, one stepping forward, then retreating again. Evelyn lifted her hand slowly in greeting, palm open. The wind rustled through the ash tree, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Luna blinked once, then turned her head slightly toward the forest, as if signaling her children. The two younger cats followed her lead, fading back into the trees. But before disappearing completely, Luna looked back one last time. That single glance felt like a farewell and a blessing both. Evelyn stood motionless long after they were gone, the forest returning to quiet. When she finally turned inside, she felt a strange peace, like something sacred had passed between them. She poured herself tea, sat by the window, and wrote in her journal. July 14. She came again. Not for food, not for safety, just to be seen. In the days that followed, Evelyn noticed little signs that Luna's family still lingered nearby. A feather caught on the porch rail, faint paw prints by the creek, a patch of flattened grass under the ash tree. It was enough to know they were still out there. Sometimes at night, when the moon rose high, she thought she heard their soft cries echo across the valley, wild, distant, but unmistakably familiar. Laura called one evening, her voice bright through the static. "Mom, the papers are still talking about you. They're calling it the mountain miracle." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Oh, honey, they always need something to talk about." Her daughter paused. "You sound different, happier." Evelyn looked toward the forest through her window. "I suppose I am." That night, she dreamed again of the storm, the crash of thunder, the flash of claws, but in the dream, Luna was not fighting. She was standing under a clear sky, her fur dry and radiant, her kittens circling her feet. Evelyn reached out a hand, and Luna came close enough for her to touch her head. "You're home," she said. Luna's reply was not words, but warmth, a pulse of light that filled the world. When she woke, dawn was spilling gold across the room. She rose, opened the curtains wide, and laughed quietly at the sight of dew glistening on the grass. The air smelled alive again. Later that morning, as she sipped her tea, Evelyn noticed something new, a feather-light motion beyond the window. There, just for an instant, at the edge of the woods, a pair of amber eyes gleamed in the sunlight. She smiled. "Good morning, Luna." By afternoon, she had printed her favorite photograph, the one she'd taken weeks before, of Luna and her kittens beneath the ash tree, golden light streaming through the branches. She framed it and hung it above the mantel, beside Daniel's portrait. Now they were both there. The man who had built her world, and the creature who had saved it. That evening, Evelyn stepped out once more before dusk. The air was warm, the forest quiet. She left the porch light burning, as always, and whispered into the trees, "Thank you for watching over me." Then she closed the door gently behind her. Outside, the light flickered softly through the leaves. For a heartbeat, 3 sets of glowing eyes shone back from the dark, the mother and her grown young, before they vanished once more into the whispering forest. Autumn arrived early in the Wasatch Mountains. The air thinned, the nights sharpened, and the leaves around Evelyn Ward's cabin turned copper and gold. The ash tree, once a haven for wild births, storms and miracles, now stood haloed in morning frost. Evelyn, 74, wrapped in her beige shawl, carried her tea to the porch each dawn. She moved slower these days, but her eyes still searched the tree line. The habit was old now, like prayer. It had been nearly 2 months since she'd last seen Luna. Each evening, Evelyn left a small lamp, glowing by the window, not to lure, not to signal, but simply to remember. Sometimes she swore she could feel those amber eyes on her from the forest. The presence lingered, not in fear, but in comfort, like the hush that follows a hymn. She had begun writing again, long pages in the journal Daniel once gave her. The cover was cracked from use, the pages lined with delicate handwriting. In one entry she wrote, "The wild isn't gone when it leaves. It stays inside you, like breath." Her words felt heavier now, but full. She had learned something from Luna, that survival wasn't just endurance. It was choosing to keep the heart open after being hurt. When Dr. Riley Hughes came by one afternoon, he found her sitting by the porch rail, camera on her lap. The sky was cloudless, the air crisp with pine and smoke. "You look peaceful," he said, his red flannel bright against the fading world. She smiled. "I am. It's been a good year." He nodded, glancing toward the ash tree. "You ever think about leaving this place? Closer to town?" Evelyn chuckled softly. "And miss my mountain? No, I'll stay here until it forgets me." She paused, then added, "Besides, I'm not alone." Riley followed her gaze but saw nothing, just the long stretch of forest beyond the fence. Still, he didn't argue. He'd learned that there were things in this valley best left unquestioned. After he left, Evelyn brewed one last pot of tea for the evening. The sunset painted the mountains in streaks of rose and amber, the same colors as Luna's fur. She poured a cup, set it on the porch rail, and whispered, "For you." The breeze carried the steam away. Inside, she turned on the old radio, letting the soft hum of a distant station fill the cabin. The voice of a folk singer drifted through static, low, tender, almost like a lullaby. Evelyn sat in her rocking chair beside the fireplace, her Nikon resting near her, the framed photograph of Luna and her kittens hanging above the mantel. Next to it was Daniel's portrait, his smile faded but steady. "You'd like her," she murmured to him. "You really would." As night came, the wind picked up. The trees outside whispered against the cabin walls. Evelyn pulled her blanket higher and leaned back. Her eyelids grew heavy, the fire's glow warming her face. Somewhere outside, a soft sound broke the rhythm of the night, a single paw step in the leaves. If she heard it, she didn't move. The porch light cast a faint pool over the yard, where shadows drifted and reshaped with the wind. From the darkness at the edge of the trees, 2 amber eyes appeared, glowing steady and watchful. Luna stood there, her coat thicker now, her stance proud. The years and seasons hadn't changed, her essence wild, strong, eternal. The bobcat stepped closer to the clearing, pausing by the ash tree. Her gaze turned toward the cabin, where Evelyn sat motionless by the fire. For a moment, it seemed the old woman and the wildcat shared a silent exchange, wordless and vast. The boundary between them, the fragile line between the human world and the wild, faded like breath on glass. A faint snow began to fall. The flakes caught on Luna's whiskers, melting against her fur. She looked up once toward the stars, then back at the cabin, before slowly turning away, her paws leaving faint prints across the frost. She vanished into the forest's heart without a sound. Inside, the fire had burned low. Evelyn's breathing was soft, even. The radio hummed a final chord before slipping into silence. On the table beside her sat her open journal. The last line she had written read, "Sometimes, the wild doesn't just survive, it remembers." Days later, Dr. Riley returned. The cabin was quiet, the air still. He found her sitting in the chair, the faintest smile resting on her lips. Outside, snow blanketed the ground in pure white. Near the porch steps, half buried in fresh powder, he noticed something unusual, a trail of paw prints leading toward the ash tree and stopping there, as if the visitor had paused to keep watch. He stood for a long moment, his breath visible in the cold. Then, he lifted his hat and whispered, "Goodbye, Evelyn." Nobody won. The mountains echoed back only the sound of wind and birds returning to the morning light. By spring, the cabin became part of the landscape again, quiet and still. But locals would sometimes say, on clear evenings, if you stood near the old ash tree, you could see a golden figure watching from the ridge. Some swore it was a bobcat. Others said it was the spirit of a woman who had loved one enough to become part of its world. Either way, the mountain remained alive, its heart beating softly beneath the ash tree where two worlds had once met, and neither had been the same again. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe, there are more gentle stories waiting.